Imagine a queen from a world of glowing skies and crystal cities, a ruler so powerful entire galaxies fear her name. Now picture her kneeling, not to a god, not to a king, but to a human, scarred, silent, and completely unprepared. What did she see in him? Why did the stars whisper his name? In a universe divided by fear, one unexpected bond could rewrite the fate of two worlds. This isn't just a story. It's the beginning of something greater. Stay with us. If you are new, here then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. In the vast skies of Sirenia, where light moved like music and the air shimmered with unseen energy, the world pulsed quietly beneath twin suns. The skies weren't blue. They glowed with ribbons of lavender and rose gold, casting a soft glow over everything they touched. Floating islands drifted lazily above the ground, and trees made of crystal swayed in a silent dance with the wind. At night, the stars burned brighter than fire, like ancient eyes watching from above. On this beautiful world ruled Queen Thalira, a leader as mysterious as her planet. She stood tall and graceful, with skin that glowed gently, and eyes that shifted color with her emotions. Her people loved her, not only because she was wise and fair, but because she carried the old songs in her heart, stories of ancestors, legends, and whispered dreams passed down through ages. Yet even with all her power, Thalira felt an emptiness, deep within her a silence louder than anything. She had ruled Sirenia for 3 centuries, seen peace and war, joy and sorrow, and yet, something remained missing. She often stood alone on her palace's highest tower, watching the stars, wondering if they ever watched her back. Far away, on a very different world, a man named Jalen Merrick lived a life shaped by struggle. Earth was not as serene as Sirenia. It had known war, and Jalen had been forged in its fire. He was a quiet man, but his silence held weight. Scars lined his body and soul, each earned in moments of survival. By 28, he was a legend in the world's defense circles. Not for how many battles he won, but for the lives he saved and the peace he fought to protect. People listened when he spoke, because they knew he spoke only when he had something important to say. When humans first contacted life beyond Earth, the universe didn't open its arms. It clenched its fists. There was fear, confusion, and mistakes. Many alien races saw humans as impulsive and dangerous. But Jalen's presence changed things. He became Earth's quiet ambassador, a living symbol of calm and chaos. So when a meeting with Sirenia was proposed, it was no surprise that he was chosen. The meeting was set on Old Helion, a desolate moon once used for interstellar warfare. Now it was empty, covered in the ashes of forgotten battles. The surface, cracked with old wounds, and the wind carried whispers that felt almost human. It was a neutral place, agreed upon by both sides. Jalen stepped out of his ship onto the moon's dust-covered ground, his armor dented but clean, a banner of unity tucked under one arm. It wasn't just cloth, it was a promise, stitched with the insignias of Earth's major nations. Across the field, Queen Thalira appeared, surrounded by her personal guard. They were tall, elegant warriors with armor that caught the light and seemed to hum with energy. They walked like the air bent around them, each movement filled with purpose. But it was Thalira who drew all eyes. She was more than royal. She was otherworldly, her presence both calm and commanding. For a moment, neither side moved. The only sound was the wind brushing across the ruins. Then, Thalira stepped forward. Her eyes locked on Jalen's. He stood tall, not in defiance, but in quiet strength. No weapon in his hand, only the banner. His dark hair moved with the breeze, and his face, though weathered, held no fear. And then the impossible happened. Thalira paused. Her skin shimmered in quick flashes, silver, deep red, then gold. Her eyes widened. Slowly, almost painfully, she lowered herself onto one knee, bowing her head before Jalen. Her guards froze. The humans watching from afar held their breath. Even Jalen didn't move, stunned by what he saw. She was a queen, born of stars and silence, ruler of a people more advanced than Earth could dream of, and she knelt to a human. No one understood why. Not at first. Jalen felt his heart race. His instinct screamed at him to step back, to question, to do something. But he didn't. He stayed, still. He watched her, trying to understand. There was no fear in her gesture, no weakness. There was only respect. And maybe something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or belief. Her guards whispered, confused and uneasy, but she raised one hand, and they fell silent. Jalen looked at her, then, slowly with steady steps, moved closer. He lowered the banner and extended it toward her. Her eyes lifted to meet his. She rose from the ground without breaking their gaze and touched the banner gently. The moment stretched, full of questions. No one could yet answer. Who was Jalen, really? What had Thalira seen in him? And what would this mean for the future of their worlds? One thing was certain. The stars had begun to shift, and neither Serenia nor Earth would ever be the same again. The sky above Serenia was unlike any Jalen Merrick had ever seen. It shimmered with soft pastels, always glowing, always alive. As his ship descended into the heart of the alien world, he felt as though he were falling into a dream, one made of light, glass, and song. The capital city of Serenia, known as the City of Mirrors, unfolded beneath him like a flower. Towers of glowing crystal reached into the sky, and wide bridges of translucent stone stretched across floating rivers of liquid light. Strange birds, with glowing feathers, soared through the air, trailing streaks of color behind them. The entire world felt like it had been painted by the stars themselves. Queen Thalira met Jalen as he stepped out into the city. She was no longer surrounded by her elite guard, only a few aides trailing quietly behind her. Her eyes, always changing color, were now a soft violet, a sign of calm or perhaps curiosity. Without words, she gestured for him to follow. Jalen walked beside her in silence, taking in every strange and beautiful thing around him. The ground beneath them glowed faintly with each step. The buildings sparkled like glass touched by sunlight. Everywhere he looked, he saw colors he had no names for. As they walked through a wide corridor of arched crystal, Jalen noticed the way people stared. The Serenians were graceful, their bodies long and thin, their skin shifting in gentle hues. Most looked at him with curiosity, some with awe, but there were others whose expressions were harder to read, faces tight, eyes narrowed. Jalen understood that look. He had seen it on Earth too. It was the face of suspicion, of those who feared what they didn't understand. Inside the palace, a new kind of silence settled over him. It wasn't cold or empty, but thick with history. Light filtered through stained crystal windows, casting ever-changing patterns on the floor. Queen Thalira brought him to a chamber filled with long strings of glowing beads and humming stones. Without speaking, she touched one of the stones, and a low melody filled the air. It wasn't a song exactly, more like a feeling that vibrated in his chest. She looked at him, then touched her chest where her heart would be. Her skin turned a soft gold. Jalen copied her gesture, unsure if he was doing it right. Thalira smiled gently and turned to another stone. This one, when tapped, showed images, floating lights that moved like memories. One image showed a tall figure standing in a field of bowed heads. Another showed two hands, one alien, one human-like, reaching toward each other. Jalen's throat tightened. These weren't just pictures. They were pieces of a story, a prophecy. And somehow, he was part of it. As the days passed, Thalira and Jalen began to communicate more easily. Without a common language, they used gestures, shared sounds, and expressions. Sometimes Thalira would hum a tune, and Jalen would respond, with a simple beat tapped on the stone floor. They found a rhythm in their silence, a language built on patience and trust. But outside the palace walls, the world was shifting. Word had spread quickly. Queen Thalira had bowed before a human. Some called it a sign of hope. Others called it a mistake. Murmurs turned to whispers. Whispers grew louder. Some of Thalira's closest advisors questioned her decision. Why trust an outsider, a being from a planet that had only just touched the stars? Jalen felt the tension each time they stepped outside. The stairs grew colder. The voices behind them grew bolder. But Thalira stood tall. Her presence never wavered. When the crowd grew restless, she calmed them with a single look. When doubts filled the air, she spoke in low musical tones, her skin glowing steady with resolve. One night, she brought Jalen to the Temple of Echoing Memory, a place of deep spiritual importance. There, among walls that shimmered with stories of the past, they stood before a large pool of still, glowing water. Thalira motioned for him to look. As he peered into the water, images surfaced, scenes from her life, from Serenya's history, and then, shockingly, a vision of himself standing among her people, hand in hand with her. The vision flickered, but it was clear. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" She didn't answer in words. She stepped forward and gently placed her palm against his chest, right where his heart beat steady. Her skin flashed a deep orange. It felt like an answer, even if he couldn't understand it fully. Later, as they returned to the palace, Jalen noticed someone watching them from a high balcony. A tall figure with a hard stare, armor glinting in the dim light. This was not a curious citizen. This was someone watching closely, maybe waiting for a reason to step in. Jalen had seen eyes like that before, eyes that didn't just doubt, they prepared for action. He knew then that his presence had stirred something far greater than diplomacy. The story unfolding wasn't just about trust. It was about belief, about change, and in a place where even the air seemed to whisper secrets, Jalen Merrick realized the silence around him wasn't empty at all. It was waiting. The days on Serenia seemed to pass like quiet songs, filled with strange beauty and soft colors. But, beneath that calm, trouble had begun to stir. Not everyone on the planet believed that Jalen Merrick belonged there. His presence, so sudden and wrapped in mystery, had awakened old fears and new anger. As he walked through the glowing streets of the City of Mirrors, he could feel it in the air. People who once watched him with wonder now turned away. Whispers followed his steps. Eyes lingered longer than before, not with curiosity, but with doubt. In the shadows of this unease stood a man named General Kavor. Tall, sharp, and unshakably loyal to his people, Kavor had served Queen Thalira for many decades. He was respected, even feared, for his wisdom and strength. His skin, a deep shade of midnight blue, rarely changed color. He was known for keeping his emotions locked behind a mask of stone, and yet even Kavor felt something when he saw Thalira kneel before a human. He felt a storm beginning to rise inside him. Kavor began gathering those who shared his worries. Quiet meetings turned into organized protests. The steps of the palace, filled with voices calling for answers. "Why trust an outsider?" they asked. "Why should we bend our fate to a stranger's path?" Thalira heard them. So did Jalen. But she did not back down, and neither did he. Jalen tried to stay focused. He trained with the Serenian warriors, learned from their leaders, and studied their histories. He spent long hours with Queen Thalira, not just sharing knowledge but building a strange friendship that crossed the borders of language. Still, he couldn't ignore the tension growing around them. The air felt heavier, the lights of the city seemed dimmer. And then, the breaking point came. Late one night, a small explosion shook the entrance of the human embassy stationed at the edge of the city. No one was killed, but the message was clear. A group had tried to force Jalen and the Earth delegation to leave. The act sent a wave of fear through both sides. Jalen stood outside the damaged doorway, staring at the scorch marks on the ground. He clenched his fists, not in anger, but in thought. He had faced violence before. This was something deeper. This was fear, born from stories told too many times and truths buried too long. That same night, Queen Thalira invited him to the royal gardens. They walked side by side through glowing plants and whispering trees. The moon above them was full and bright, casting silver shadows across the grass. Thalira didn't speak right away. When she finally did, her voice was soft. "There is a place," she said, "where answers wait." She spoke of the Shrine of Echoing Stars, a sacred place far from the city, older than most memories. According to Serenian legend, it was there that ancient leaders once went to seek guidance during great changes. It was said that the shrine tested those who entered, revealing truths they might not want to face. Thalira told Jalen that if he truly wished to help, they had to go there, together. Without hesitation, Jalen agreed. They traveled in silence, flying in a small craft across endless valleys of glowing stone. Below them, the land shifted in color, as if breathing. When they reached the shrine, it stood like a forgotten crown on a hilltop. The walls were worn with time, but the glow within remained strong. The inside of the shrine was a single round room, open to the stars above. The floor was carved with ancient symbols pulsing faintly beneath their feet. As they stepped inside, something shifted in the air. Jalen felt a warmth, not from the room, but from inside his chest. He looked at Thalira. She nodded once, then closed her eyes. Without words, they were pulled into a vision. Images floated around them, scenes from Serenia's past. Wars, peace, betrayal, unity. And then, the prophecy. A figure standing beneath two moons beside a queen. The faces were unclear, but the feeling was strong. Jalen felt it pull at him, calling to something deep inside. He staggered slightly, overwhelmed. The vision shifted. Now he saw his own past. Moments he had buried. Loss, fear, choices made in fire. It was like standing inside his own heart. Thalira was beside him, watching, sharing the weight. Her own memories bled into his. They stood together, surrounded by pain and hope, wrapped in light and shadow. Then a voice filled the space, not in words, but in meaning. Only together can the path be found. Suddenly they were back in the shrine, breathing hard, shaken, but changed. Outside, they were not alone. General Caver stood with a group of armed guards. His face was unreadable. Thalira stepped forward, her skin glowing with a calm strength. She said nothing. She simply reached for Jalen's hand. Slowly, carefully, Jalen took it. The shrine behind them began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with their joined hands. For a moment, Kavor stood frozen. His soldiers waited. Then, slowly, he removed his helmet. He looked at Thalira, then at Jalen. And for the first time, his skin shimmered, light blue, the color of surrender. He dropped to one knee. A silence followed, not heavy this time, but filled with something else. Possibility. The sun rose slowly over Serenia, casting soft gold across the hills and floating towers. Light danced across the city of mirrors, catching the edges of every crystal and filling the air with a quiet warmth. But deep inside the citadel, where the halls echoed with ancient whispers, two leaders sat side by side watching stars fade from the sky. Jalen Merrick and Queen Thalira hadn't spoken much since their return from the Shrine of Echoing Stars. They didn't need to. The silence between them now carried weight, not of fear or confusion, but of understanding. Word of what happened at the shrine spread quickly. People spoke of visions, of old truths being revealed, and of General Kavor laying down his weapon. Some called it a miracle. Others weren't sure what to believe. But one thing had changed. Jalen was no longer seen as a stranger. Whispers of distrust became murmurs of curiosity. Doors that had been closed slowly began to open. Even Kavor, once cold and certain in his distrust, now stood with the Queen in meetings, his voice calm, his eyes less sharp. Thalira and Jalen worked together every day. They reviewed maps, studied reports, and held talks with leaders from across the galaxy. The more they worked, the more their bond grew. There was no longer just respect between them. There was something warmer, deeper. It showed in small things. A glance, a shared laugh, the way they moved together without needing to speak. But even in those moments of peace, the shadow of what lay ahead remained. At the edge of known space, there was a planet named Virene. Once green and alive, it now spun in silence. Storms raged across its surface, and broken cities dotted the landscape like open wounds. It had become the center of a growing conflict, one that threatened not just Scifiadventure, but Earth as well. Thalira had seen it in the vision at the shrine. Jalen had felt it too. Whatever had begun there would not end in silence. Inside the Citadel's star chamber, Thalira activated the ancient table once more. Lights rose in the air, forming a map of the galaxy. One section flickered dimly, the space around Virene. Thalira pointed to it, her skin turning a somber shade of gray-blue. Jalen leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the swirling symbols. Virene was calling for help, though it had no voice left, and both knew the answer couldn't come from just one people. Jalen turned to Thalira. "We can't wait. If we do, the damage will spread." She nodded, placing a hand over her heart, then reaching toward him. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. They would go together. Preparations began immediately. Scifiadventure ships shaped like blades of light lifted from the ground. Earth sent its own, rougher in shape but strong and fast. For the first time, human pilots and Scifiadventure captains trained side by side, sharing strategies and stories. There were still doubts, still questions, but hope had started to grow. Before they left, Thalira gathered the people in the great amphitheater beneath the mountain. Thousands filled the seats, their eyes glowing with shifting colors. She stood at the center with Jalen beside her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was expectant, alive. Then she began to speak. Her voice rose like a song, slow and steady. Jalen didn't understand every word, but he felt the meaning. She spoke of unity, of bravery, of trust. She spoke of a path not walked alone. When she finished, she turned to Jalen. He stepped forward and raised the banner of unity Earth had given him. It fluttered in the wind, catching the twin suns as they began to set. A cheer rose from the crowd, first quiet, then loud, echoing through the valleys like thunder. The silence had roared. They left Scifiadventure as the sky turned silver. The ships moved like stars in formation, cutting through space with quiet purpose. As they approached Virene, the sight before them was worse than expected. Fires still burned in some cities, and the planet's energy fields were failing. But hope arrived with them. Jalen and Thalira landed first, stepping onto the cracked surface together. Their presence was a message. They were not conquerors. They were not enemies. They were a promise. The days that followed were filled with hard choices and long nights. But slowly they began to bring change. Relief teams rebuilt shelters. Peace talks opened with surviving leaders. The air, once thick with fear, began to clear, and at the heart of it all were Jalen and Thalira, moving as one. On the final day of the mission, as the skies over Virene cleared for the first time in months, the two stood on a ridge overlooking the city. Around them stood Scifiadventures and humans, alike, tired but proud. Thalira turned to Jalen. Her skin shimmered a soft, glowing gold. He smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep peace. "We did this," he said. "Together." She nodded, then reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, not as rulers, not as warriors, but as something more, symbols of what could be. As the stars returned to the sky, brighter than before, the silence came once more, but this time it was not the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of understanding, of peace. And in that silence, a new story began.